right, so this is the testing internal customer call for November 2021. We do these every 6 weeks, and I always lose track of what month it is. First on the agenda, I have a couple of things. Welcome to Robbie, who's going to be the new product manager for testing. Robbie, if you want to do just super quick intros, tell everybody about yourself, everybody being Joanna and Kyle.
Sure. So this is my second week. I'm still wrapping up a few loose ends with onboarding. So you may not really see me surface yet doing a lot of project management tasks just yet, but just expect to see that by the end of the week. And I really enjoy streamlining processes. And so I'm told that there is an opportunity in verified testing to do that. So I'm really excited to dive in and start to prioritize and then help the automations work as best as they can to make the customers happy for their needs. So look forward to working with you.
So thank you. Roadmap deck, Robbie and I updated, no great big changes in what's going on, what's active. We did reprioritize a bit after current work on build artifacts. We're going to be working on some, well, we being testing, I'm stepping out of that. Robbie and Scott, welcome Scott, and the team are going to be working on some experiments, more top of funnel as we think about customers starting to create their pipelines and then use their pipelines based on what we learned in our most recent research around how people are testing and if they're using those test summary features to try to drive more adoption there. We think that that'll be helpful and help drive in turn community contributions beyond usage, so that that'll help accelerate the flywheel a little bit, getting some of those community contributions in. So that's the slight tweak in the roadmap, but otherwise that deck is up to date and ready for you to review. Kyle, go ahead.
Can you make the connection for me on, like, you talked about the flywheel and increasing community contributions? I didn't quite get that when I went through the deck. Can you talk more to that?
Yeah, that was super spontaneous comment for me.
Okay.
But we have a good number of parsing things, a good number of report support issues that are in the backlog that we think that if we can get community contributions like we did for test coverage visualization around those report types, it'll help us increase our usage, which in turn brings more customers to the platform. And those will all end up being core contributions or core features, which in turn we can drive more community contribution, we think, as we expand our user base with more report types.
Got it. That makes sense. We've been looking, so this is tangential, and this is also an area I get to play in for good or bad, but we've been trying to figure out how do we better direct community contributors to a subset of issues that are maybe fit for them. So what you're talking about is very apt to that goal, where it sounds like you have a set of issues that works towards a bigger theme that we should direct, whether it's back end or front end community contributors to. I'd be really interested somewhere down the line in like just looping me into the epic or issues for that, because it would just be another opportunity to highlight
and
issues that are fit to collaborate. Sorry.
No worries. I was going to say we haven't been able to tag as many issues as I'd like. That was on the it was one of the possibilities for our team OKRs this quarter, but it didn't make the cut for us in testing around setting a number of issues that are community contribution or ready for contribution. I don't remember what the right label is, but that is something that I think Robbie and Scott could definitely work with you on going forward. Set a big direction, lay out some of the low-hanging fruit around easy adoption of those features, and creating documentation about how we can build those features or add to those report types. We have an epic set out to add support for Jacoco coverage and changing away from cobertura as the keyword to coverage report as the keyword. That might be a great place to start. And then building out, here's the documentation for you, how you build a parser that parses more of these so you can layer that in yourself, and then we'll just naturally get the users from it.
Awesome.
Yeah,
thanks.
The last thing I'll add there is that I think that Package has done a great job of that. They've had a good number of contributions around entire new repository types or registry types and package types that users have completely added, and that came after they built that documentation of how do you contribute. So that might be a good bit of work that could be invested in and verify overall. Awesome.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for that.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to jump over the dogfooding test history as a follow-up and jump into Mac, your first topic, if you are ready and want to voice that over.
Yeah, thanks for picking up this conversation. So
Yeah.
We have had some discussions on the side and the need from stakeholders to know how each test is doing, how often they have been failing for a period of, I say 6 months to a year. And I want to make sure we are keeping this group informed and discussed, because I would hate to burst into to implement further while finding out that it's eventually on the roadmap on the test history report. So I'm trying to dig up the agenda item from our reliability stand-up. So essentially, we show how often a test has been quarantined and how if they are still quarantined, and then we want 80% of our tests to be green and working and stable over time. And I'm glad that we have, is it 15 days of history currently?
We track 2 weeks, 14 days.
14 days, okay. And eventually, how can we dog food this further if this is going to land in the product? And on our side, it's in the ops instance, so it won't be as in your face as customers using it, but we could move towards dog fooding further where things land.
Yeah. I think that I'm going to add. I think, well, Kyle, why don't you talk through your agenda point, and then I'll jump in from there.
Oh, mine's the next point down. Sorry. So like we're 1 point above. I was just.
Oh, okay. I think we're
Sorry.
combining the two, dogfooding test history reports and speedy, reliable pipelines. I was lumping those two together, I think. But yeah, sorry, I'm mixing topics. That's my bad. So we have what we're working on currently, or one of the MVCs that the team is in, is the project quality summary. That will start to show the execution data. From there, I think that the next logical step down that path is the historic test data for projects. That will be that next click as you go from a project showing currently how many tests are passing, being skipped, and failing, into history of those metrics over time. And that's the next step as well, in that we're tracking over 14 days, how many times has this failed in master. That's really shallow, super MVC. We can expand on that data set. The concern has always been how much data we're going to retain. And so I think that there's still a spike in there for the team to noodle on. How do we get good directional data, a good amount of detail for the user without having to store everything and blowing up the database, so that GitLab suddenly becomes super slow when you're trying to load any sort of report page or looking at the pipeline page if we start to pull that data into there. So that is the balance that I think we need to have with that. And I'll link to that epic in the agenda. So Mike, does that add the color, give you the context that you were looking for?
Yeah, when do we think it's going to land? And of course, we have engineering allocations and reliability. I know that's coming in as well. I'm not asking to rev up the date. Just realistically, when do you think there's going to be a preview that we could enable on the our ops instance and start to see data, or even in the mono repo, where we can get some metrics that would be a good start?
Yeah, it doesn't look like any of our issues have a fiscal year quarter on them. Do we? Tentatively slated the project level test history for default branch. I had put a fiscal year 23 Q1 label on it. So that would be happening at some point where we just kicked off Q4. So starting February through February, March, April. So sometime early 2022 calendar year is when we would be, that's when we had slated to start looking into that.
A date is better than no date, so we'll take it.
Yeah, and really, I say that, but Robbie's the DRI on this and the prioritization. So you want to sync back with them going forward with this.
And I added the links under my name. They're gonna have the numbered bullet points. So yeah, under my name, there's a link to the daily stand-up, which is now by 2 times a week.
Okay.
And our team did the workaround. So things are in the ops instance. Infrastructure has Grafana pipelines, data ingestion already. So we piggyback on that boring solution, pipe it out to Grafana, and then we have another post processing that we upload to our PIs eventually. So eventually, I would love to have this shown in the product or built from the feature sets and not using Grafana. This gets us moving for now, and it's also for you to see where we're using it, and if it's helps with product validation and product market fit, then by all means, please leverage the links.
Yeah, that's always super helpful to see how we're using this data. I know Remy had started looking at, I don't remember what the data point was, but starting to use the metrics reports to track, I want to say job duration over time. And it's really just comparing it to what is happening on main versus what is happening in that pipeline. Or in that MR rather. I don't know how far they've gotten into that, but that's another area where we want to look at tracking metrics like job duration, test duration, things like that.
Yeah, so he's using I think it's called the custom attributes that you can add, not the custom attribute, I don't know, the metrics that you can associate, yeah, metrics report on the MR. That's already done, but what we can't do is like block or warn if you're exceeding a threshold. So historically, we can use that to say, oh, here's the MR that created a performance regression for job A, and that's great, but it's almost easier to find that, it's not almost, it is easier to find that data in Sisense than anything in the product.
Yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like the outcome would be that if you're beyond some threshold, though, you want to block.
Yeah, whether it's red or just say, hey, are you aware that job A is higher than the P99, like is 20% higher than the P99, or just like anything, but like that sort of configuration is what I have in mind, where it's an informed path forward.
You're thinking about it at the job level.
Yeah, I think that's the best for our workflow, because we'll see different changes have impacts to jobs versus like the entire pipeline. They may not manifest in the total pipeline duration, but one job might go up by 60% of duration unexpectedly.
Yeah, okay. Great. So we've covered the points I wanted to cover on the dogfooding the test history reports. Thanks, everyone. Anything else to close that out? Or are we ready to move on to speedy, reliable pipelines? All right, let's do it. Meg, you had a question about who this falls under. I think this is kind of overall all of Verify in speedy, reliable pipelines. Testing is usually the biggest or the longest tent pole in how long pipelines take. And I think that's especially the case for us. This is why we talk to Kyle so much, right? About how do we speed up these tests and run tests more reliably. But I think there's other opportunities there. I had an MR open and I have a research item open now, close the MR to figure out if there's opportunity to create a pipeline efficiency group around things like, hey, my pipelines are too slow, or they're getting slower over time, or hey, this job is always the slowest of all of the jobs, even though it has, only 2 commands in it. Answering questions like that, more exploratory questions, and hopefully less alert type things. But that's probably naturally where we could go. Beyond that, what other questions could we answer for you?
Yeah, this is mostly a double check from my end, because we've been hearing that we need to dog food more and then do more product validation. Wanted to triple check that this is this stakeholder meeting is what we should continue to double down on, and then we can lean on you to collaborate with the rest of the groups in Verify. So I'm not proposing to change anything. It's more of an off-the-cuff question if there's anything else, because I'm looking at the direction on pages and then linking back to what we can do dog food. And so thanks for confirming that.
And there's a new Verify direction page that Jackie spun up that I don't think it has anything more specific. But it does talk about the direction of the stage a little bit more outside of ops, because the ops direction page is very broad. It is very similar to the deployment or the delivery direction page that Kevin put together recently. I'll link to that in the agenda as well. And then Mick, you have.
I was just gonna say, I know back in August, we kind of talked about, like I scrolled down, we talked about bringing more analytics around like the concept of like CI minutes and things like that. Is there any progress on that front?
We haven't seen
so
any
that
progress. We haven't seen any progress on that front with the engineering allocations and some of the other work that we've prioritized recently around stability. That is a huge opportunity, I personally think, and we'll work to research to validate that. And that's a place that we can move forward for pipeline execution, my new group. I think that Robbie can move forward with that in testing if it's the best opportunity. And I think that Darren is starting to think about that in the enterprise runner management as well. And I'll have Vitika's here a little bit on the design front there. But those are all areas where I think that we could start to gather data, put interesting views together for users to get more out of the platform.
Cool. I want to voice understanding. I know engineering allocations and reliability is key. So that was the highest priority last quarter.
All right, I think our last point is yours, Mac. You want to voice over?
Yeah, I haven't been digesting this on the side, so please take the opportunity to educate me if I'm lagging behind everyone. I know we aligned 2 quarters ago on reducing pipeline duration, and then there was discussion around fail-fast templates and dynamic mapping. My perception is that dynamic mapping is a lot complex than we thought it was. Just want to get an update from you. Where is that next iteration? And if there's anything slated for Q4 or Q1 that we could take advantage of in speeding up the pipelines?
There's nothing that I had on the roadmap around this specifically or the template itself. Drew was moved to a different group and he was the kind of champion of this effort. And it's, as with everything else, it just hasn't been a priority for us right now. Last I remember, I don't want to throw this at Kyle too much, but Kyle and Albert were working on some experiments and we had a good number of results from that, but I don't remember where we ended up. But I don't think the ball wasn't back in our court to make improvements that we thought would move the needle on overall pipeline duration. I think the team was going in a different direction, that this was not going to work as well as we had thought. Kyle, did I remember that right, or am I totally way off and throwing you under the bus?
So engineering productivity is looking at how we can use dynamic mapping in our project pipeline to run a selective set of tests that apply most to the MR. So Mac, I just want to kind of reiterate, that's a tooling implementation, not a product implementation. And I think the long-term goal is that maybe we can learn from our tooling usage to see how we can bring something to the product to run a selective set of tests, especially for large projects like that are similar to GitLab, where there's 187,000 tests that would run in every MR if we didn't do something about it. And then as far as fail fast, I'm not aware of any lessons learned from the customer's implementation. I don't even know if it's still being used. That might be a better question. I know Zeph did that MR. He might know, or whoever the counterpart is for that group. I think I was just looking at the CI configuration. I don't see it in there anymore, so I don't think it's being used.
I see. Okay.
I can take as a to-do following up with Zeph and see where that ended up. I owe him a coffee chat anyway. The other context that I think I can bring to this is that we just did a number of customer interviews around flaky tests and green pipelines and when pipelines fail. And we found really interesting data around customers who can run all of their tests locally, really don't care if they have to rerun the pipeline as much. And if they have to run every test, the microservice architecture was the primary use case, a lot of greenfield development, super early startup, small places. As we talk to customers who are on the opposite end, more of like what GitLab has of, it's either mono repo or a very old code base with a lot of unit tests in it. Developers are not running any of those tests locally. They'll validate that their change works and then they'll push it up. So I think that we could, as we try to niche this down and focus on who this solves for, it is really GitLab and the GitLab type of repository and projects where there's just so many tests that running them locally is a non-starter. I'm just not going to do it. and I'll wait for CI to run all of those tests for me. If that helps simplify our efforts here, I think that those are good lessons learned from that research.
I see. Yeah, I want to hone in on that. If it's big shop customers that likely have a really backlog of tests written 5-6 years, and this would be more and more impactful. If you're starting new in a new startup, 20 tests, and there's nobody not wanting to run locally, right? So that's
and I think that like we talk about not running as many tests. I wonder if there's opportunities around not having as many tests. If there's other ways that we could solve this, of you don't want to run as many, but if you don't have as many, you're not going to run as many. Are there stale tests that just don't exercise code anymore that exists, and helping teams understand those dynamics as well? As we kind of back away from what this solution is and think more holistically about the problem, I think there's some interesting opportunities potentially out there to make sure. Yeah.
I appreciate that remark. It comes full circle. This is why we want the test history.
Yeah.
To determine if there's a test that's been running for a year and it never failed.
Yeah.
Those are the ones we can likely retire once validated. So that it's interrelated.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like that we brought this full circle and reiterated we should really get test history done.
Are you, I guess, are you hearing from customers similar things that we want to run less tests? Like I see that in the industry for more established companies quite a bit. So I just wanted to make sure like we're not coming full circle back to let's remove tests from our test set and overlooking we still need to run less tests because our order of magnitude is significantly higher than a microservices app with maybe thousands of tests across the whole test pyramid, and we have almost 200,000.
Mm-hmm. I would say the feedback was, I want a pipeline that's, when I start it, I think it's going to run green. So if part of that solution space is don't run a bunch of tests that are flaky, or can you tell me that tests might be flaky and run those ones first? I think there's a lot of solutions to that problem. What was interesting in that research that we did was for those smaller customers, if they got still 3/4 of the way through a pipeline and it failed, and then they knew that retrying it was the fix, they were still super annoyed. Their pipelines were only 5 minutes long though. So when you talk about, I went from 5 minutes to 8 minutes in my pipeline, and that was super painful. Scott and I, who were doing the research, just kind of chuckled to ourselves like, you think 5-minute pipelines are long, you should look at our 1.5-hour long pipelines. Like when that runs 45 minutes and then fails, that's super annoying. But that pain point is still real for them, of they expect that feedback loop as fast as possible. So when things get in the way of that, that just a retry fixes, it's super annoying. So there's lots of opportunity, I think, within that problem space.
Yeah. And I'll say one plug, I'll kind of put it here, is as we're looking at contributor tooling and GDK, one of the things we'd like to do is allow people to easily run that subset of tests locally, whether it's the test that most recently failed or the test that most apply to the change based on the main line. Engineering productivity is in discussions on like, how do we provide that data in a way that can be consumed with a CLI tool? So we shift out of that mindset of, I'm going to push my code, go get a coffee, wait for feedback, and see if my code change even worked. We enable people to do that locally or in a cloud development environment of their choosing.
I know there's an open issue around running tests in the cloud from local development. Are there other, I guess, what are the pain points or the friction points in getting that data? Is it a compute problem? Is it we don't have the data problem to figure out? Like where are we lacking information? Or
so the data point of like what test most recently failed is kind of challenging to get from GitLab in a usable way to pipe into like an RSpec command, for example. That's where a test file finder gives us some benefits. The tests that most apply to a change, that's something that is computationally expensive. We have to compute it on every MR based on the diff, align it to the dynamic spec analysis output, or just we use their find related tests. And it varies based on tech stack. So it depends on which problem we're optimizing for there, like the most recently failed test or the test that most apply to the change that's in progress.
So I wonder if there's an opportunity to push that compute back up to GitLab, if that could run as a, helper service somewhere of find the test for me before I run, as you're creating your MR or whatever it might be, that can run as part of the pipeline, but it doesn't run locally.
Yeah, I think that would be great. We have a bunch of detect test jobs that create a JSON file that then gets consumed later in the pipeline or in subsequent pipelines to know which tests to run. And then like the other thing that we find problematic, I'll say like the other product feature that we find problematic with this is our CI configuration allows us to split a job across lots of builds, right? So we can say parallel 20, take our RSpec jobs, run it on 20 runners simultaneously. That's awesome. However, when we run a subset of tests, there's no configuration option to say like automatically expand this set based on the duration data that is known or how long these tests take. So we're still running 20 executors, but maybe we're running 4 tests on those 20 executors. So 16 of them run nothing. They spin up a runner, do all of the pre-checks, then be like, I don't have anything to do, done. And that's not efficient.
Okay.
There is an issue, I think, for like automatically determining that parallel factor that I've seen before.
Yeah.
But my point for talking about that is like there's multiple different like problem areas. If you shift things to GitLab, then there's kind of a different problem that I think will surface.
Sure. Good to know. All right. Cool. Well, lots of great discussion today. Robbie, hopefully that gave you a lot of good context around some of the problems that we've been trying to solve for, I think, the entire time I've been here with engineering productivity, some of the efforts that we've made. I think we dug into a lot of the stuff that we've done. And I have a takeaway to circle back to Zeph on that fail fast template and see where that ended up and what next steps might have been. Make sure we get that ball picked back up.
So I have a little bit of context around that.
Oh, great.
It turned out that the customers team had made some enhancements to their pipeline already that sped it up. And so when we implemented the fail fast template, it didn't save them any time. I think it actually even added a couple of minutes, which was why we disabled. But I don't know what the next steps after that were going to be.
That sounds familiar. We had talked about running against a bigger pipeline or a bigger test bed, and I don't remember what the hurdle was there.
I feel like this is done in the mono repo. Like I'm trying to frantically search. I don't know if we use the template. I think maybe we're overwriting parts of it. Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, it's something I guess we could look at to see how we can use the template more, but we can have our own fail fast logic around like RSpec, I think FOSS impact, where we'll mark a pipeline as failed if those jobs fail earlier in the pipeline than everything else. And I think we'll stop I think it marks it as canceled because you can't technically stop all jobs without canceling everything.
Yeah. So we had talked about halting the jobs earlier in the process when we knew the pipeline was going to fail already. Okay. Well, I'll still follow up with Zeph and then just get that run. Follow up with Zeph just to talk to Zeph. And we'll go from there about what we did actually implement and what next steps were. So Kyle, I will probably ping you in engineering productivity and make sure that I have that all wrapped up. We'll get an update out to everyone about answering that question. All right. Well, that'll be my last to do for this meeting, but I'll probably keep attending because I have vested interest as part of pipeline execution too, of how we're trying to make pipelines run faster.
Like Hotel California.
Yeah.